Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Jewelry isn't a gift you give just once. It's a way to remind your loved one of a beautiful moment every time they see it. Blue Nile can help you find the gift that says how you feel and says it beautifully, with expert guidance and a wide assortment of jewelry of the highest quality at the best price. Go to BlueNile.com and experience the convenience of shopping Blue Nile, the original online jeweler since 1999. That's BlueNile.com to find the perfect jewelry gift for any occasion. BlueNile.com.
For exclusive podcasts and more, sign up at patreon.com/Partners in Crime Media.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On. Crime Writers On is the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, other podcasts. And this week, we're doing a rewind to our 2018 review of the classic true crime podcast, Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo, from the CBC and host Connie Walker. Joining me to do that is my true crime co-author, co-podcaster, husband and love of my life, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
So, Kevin, what exactly are we doing here?
Well, as you know, every summer we go to an every other week schedule. So instead of having nothing in our feed, we decided to do rewinds of classic true crime titles. So if you don't remember what we talked about when we had some of these really great topics, then it's a good time to catch up.
Do you think our reviews hold up from way back when?
Absolutely. I mean, we did the first 8 out of 10 episodes of Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo, which, as you recall, was season 2 of Missing and Murdered with Connie Walker. And we all agree this was an all-time great podcast, but we did have some issues with it, particularly the writing.
We did.
Yeah, and you'll pick it up. I think, Rebecca, out of 8 hours, you picked the perfect clip to illustrate what the problem was. Also, we have our first instance of Laura discussing going on a walk and being enraged.
This is the very first time Laura refers to rage walking?
Well, she doesn't call it rage walking then, but the seed is planted. We see that it becomes a pattern for her.
It's the proto-rage walk.
Yeah, she's going out and swearing to herself, so that's gonna be something.
I always imagine what it's like living in Laura's tiny town of Exeter, New Hampshire, which, by the way, is not that tiny. It's just like regular-sized small town.
Right.
I imagine, like, you know how you have a neighborhood figure who is somebody that you don't really know, but you see them all the time and they're always doing something weird. Mm-hmm. I always imagine that Laura is like that lady who walks and swears. That's what I always imagine. So let's listen to our classic review of Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo.
To have your family member stolen, murdered, then missing?
Oh, wait a minute. This is Cleo.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
The government can get away with things if nobody knows that, what happens.
Yeah, I'm not sure that information is correct.
She was driven away and I went the other way. And I've been looking for her ever since. Promised I'd find her and eventually I will.
She tried her darndest to get back to Canada and see her family. She did everything within her power to get back there.
In my heart, I think that killed her.
Are you recording me?
Yes, is that okay?
No, it's not.
Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo looks at the case of a girl both allegedly murdered and now missing. In the show, we follow reporter Connie Walker as she hopes to find out what happened to a young Cree Indian girl who died and whose remains are unaccounted for 40 years after she and her siblings were forced into adoption. The investigation highlights the aftermath of a misguided Canadian program called the 60s Scoop that took 20,000 Native children from their families and placed them in predominantly white homes all over North America. Now, we are going to be discussing some spoilers in our conversation. So if you'd rather hear our review of whether or not you should check out this podcast, look at the timestamp that we put in the show notes to find out where you should skip to get our thumbs up or thumbs down review. I just want to start with the obvious thing. The thing that I told you, Kevin, when I started listening to this podcast and said, yeah, you got to check it out. Mm-hmm. Someone knows something in this podcast.
Yeah. We're not left to, well, we don't know exactly how things are going to turn out, but we do get an answer to what happened to Cleo.
Yes, and that is surprising and I think really satisfying and something that's a little bit different than some of the other shows we've listened to. Mm-hmm. But I do want to talk a little bit about structure because the first 3 episodes of this show are build up and backstory, explaining what it is that Connie's trying to do, what the issue is that led to Cleo's disappearance, and kind of getting a lot of that context and backstory in place. Laura, what did you think of the setup? The first 3 episodes in particular of Missing and Murder Finding Cleo, where, we kind of get the backstory. We then visit, Christine, the one sister. We go see April, the second sister. We go see Johnny, the brother in Pennsylvania. And really get a full picture of the pain of these people and why this case is so important to them.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to the backstory and I'm listening to the thin explanation that they all had about what happened to Cleo. Mm-hmm. And it was really strange to me. It was like they all heard the same story, but nobody knew exactly when or where. It was like Arkansas. She was killed. She was raped. To me, it was very mysterious how they all actually heard the same very random, very thin story about what happened. But as I'm listening to everything that they've gone through, and it's basically very transparent the way that Connie is reporting it as she's putting this together. So you're kind of going along with her. You feel like you're kind of in on the action as she is learning everything about what we know to date at that point about Cleo. I was left at that point thinking there was no way in hell they're going to find this girl or what happened to her, because it may have happened here. It may have happened there. We're not sure. We don't know. It just seemed like they had so little information to go on and so many roadblocks that they had hit, but also just tragic what had, really separated all these siblings to get to where they were when the story begins with Connie.
Right. Now, Toby, you actually have the take that what makes this podcast different is that they start with a mystery that seems solvable.
Well, this may just be showing my ignorance, but you're trying to find somebody who's not hiding. It's mostly a matter of finding the right records and following a path that happened 40 years ago. While people aren't being necessarily all that helpful, at the same time, there's nobody who's trying to prevent them from finding stuff. So I kind of felt as though she had set up wisely, this isn't in any way a slam on it, a situation where there could have been a reasonable expectation that they would have been successful in finding what happened to Cleo. And they do. And some of it, there's some sort of luck and coincidence that occurs. But my sense is that they probably would have found this stuff out anyway.
Well, there was one huge lucky break, which was that the producer on the show was, looking at databases and looking at the website, findagrave.com, which I have actually used in my own work. Findagrave.com is actually a super useful tool to find dead people because it really literally is a database of people's pictures of graves that people have randomly uploaded as one of these crowdsourcing tools. They find the grave. Turns out the grave really is her, but then they have this unbelievable break on the reporting trip. And Kevin, this almost exactly the same thing happened to you on a reporting trip. So can you just talk about that real quick?
Yeah, this is the parallel. When I went to Alabama to do some research on Sheila LaBarre, female serial killer in New Hampshire, I went to her hometown and went to the county courthouse to look up if she had any criminal records or divorce records, anything like that.
And just like Connie, you were on a very limited time frame.
Right. You're only in town for a little while.
We hear Connie saying a couple of times, like, we can only hear for like 2 or 3 days. And like, we've had a couple listeners ask questions about that, but that's legit. That's how these trips work, right?
Yeah. Well, your boss is sending you. You're not going to be able to just walk around and do whatever you want. Like Brian from S-Town. I don't know, maybe I'll interview the killer standing over there. I don't know. Yeah, so I had like 2 days or whatever. So I went to the courthouse and I asked, can I see any records on a Sheila Bailey? And I saw like one woman look like her head snapped up, and then she got up from her desk and like sneaked out a side door. Like there was going to be a shootout at the OK Corral, and she was like escaping through the Batwing doors. And they said, like, go wait in the hallway. And I'm thinking, like, oh, I'm getting the runaround because I'm a northerner or some other crap like that. And then this woman comes out and she says, I'm Sheila's sister. And I was like, whoa, yeah. And she ended up being a great source.
Yeah.
And we're still Facebook friends, so there's that. But it is kind of I don't want to say needle in a haystack, but yeah, that is sort of, that's always sort of a surprising turn.
Yeah. Laura, what did you think when you heard this scene? So this is the funeral home in that town in New Jersey where they find the grave. They're sent there to talk to the owner, Jill, and they end up running into another Jill, who just seems like she's just trying to maybe be helpful and just get them some papers. And then
Jill said she was 13 years old in 1978, the same age as Cleo Madonia. It's a long shot, but I show her the picture we have of Cleo, the one we've been carrying around with us for months. So are you from here as well? I was just wondering if you would recognize her photo.
No, I don't think so. I am from here, but no, I don't recognize her picture.
But then she looks at the photo again.
Oh, wait a minute. This is Cleo.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yes, wow. Yeah, she and I were friends.
What?
Yes.
And
how many of your 8th grade friends are working in funeral homes?
Exactly. Laura, what did you think of this break in the story?
I was like, this is gold. You know, I loved this whole scene in general because I felt like the suspense kept building. Like they're at the cemetery and you're following, they're walking around looking. And then this old lady comes out. What are you doing? And then she's like, you got to go see Earl at the other cemetery. And I mean, it just, you know, I was really invested at this point. So when they go to this funeral home and then the girl comes back up and she's got the records and she suddenly realizes, I couldn't even believe it. I was like, my poor husband, I'm like recounting this whole thing for him because I was like, you're not even going to believe this. Like, I thought there was not a chance in hell they're going to find her. And this random woman at a funeral home was her childhood friend, and you know,
and still has pictures of her at her house.
It was
who keeps
amazing.
Pictures from 8th grade?
Like, how can you play? I mean, you could never have planned something like or expected something like that to happen, but it just made this story just so incredible. And things like this just kept happening in this series, you know, and I'm like, this woman, Connie, is like the luckiest person I know or something, because these just crazy coincidences keep happening as she's reporting. Either that or she's just, I mean, she is just really good at investigating. But,
yeah. Well, she's also really nice and she listens to people. And I said this to Kevin earlier, and I'm not 100% sure you agreed with me, Kevin. I think she could teach a masterclass to asshole podcasters in how to actually approach people and talk to them. Because she actually keeps all of her approaches in the show. We hear the first knock on the door, and when she first talks, we hear her walk up to Cleo's dad in the casino.
Hi, I'm Connie.
Oh, hi.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Good.
Good? Are you winning? There are people playing at the machines on either side of Sydney, and it's really cramped. Not an ideal place for this conversation.
Do we buy you a coffee or something?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, well, we'll just be over here. Let us know when you're...
I keep wondering, though, what is the microphone situation? How come she's walking into these buildings and knocking on doors holding a microphone?
It sounds like the microphone is down low during the introductions. They're off mic during the intro. It sounds like it's down here.
You went to a casino? Okay, yeah. I don't know how that part works. That's kind of how my mind is.
Well, remember, they did that in the funeral home because the woman asked them to turn the microphone off. And then she made the decision to turn it back on.
I'll just say...
I thought she was taping on her phone or something, because it seemed like she's always taping.
I think it's down low.
Look, I'll just say this, folks. Think about where you're working. If somebody walked in and they're holding a microphone, no matter what, they may be smiling or whatever, that's going to be all of a sudden the thing that you notice.
Yeah.
And you may make a decision. You're not going to say, oh, yeah. You'll make a decision about whether or not you want that to continue.
It's a question I would ask Connie,
Which
like just with how she's holding it. I think her producer's holding it. I think they're holding it like just down here. They're not doing this, like in the face.
Right.
You know it's a good practice when you arrive somewhere. You start rolling tape before you get out of the car. That's the way you do it to get a story, right? That's how you sometimes get great sound of the dog barking in the yard and the scene sound.
Right.
And if you're David Ridgen, the wind
microphone.
chimes that sound like angels.
I'm not saying she hid the microphone.
I don't think she hid it.
You're not supposed to do that.
I think
I'm just surprised I don't hear anybody reacting to the fact that somebody just walked in and is recording them.
Right.
You know, that nobody seems to be concerned about that.
Right, but what do you think
seems like they're oblivious to it.
I think it's how she presents herself. I think that the way that she presents herself is very non-confrontational, very approachable, very like gentle when she goes in and starts talking to people. So I think that she kind of disarms them in that way because she's not aggressive in the way that she's going in to talk to people. She kind of eases in, and it seems like the people get, comfortable very fast, and they don't feel threatened by her. So maybe that's why they're not, noticing the microphone right up front. Or if they are, just her demeanor is making it such that they're not getting anxious about that.
She has a very open demeanor as a journalist when she approaches people. And I think that she has the secret weapon of being Cree. So when she talks to people who are also Indigenous, First Nation, Canadian people, the first conversation they have is, where are you from? Where are you? And so she's able to sort of use that as an inroad. When she talks to people who are white here in the States, she approaches them like, this is not my first choice to be doing this. Hello, here's what I'm doing. Here's who I am, in a way that's transparent and warm. And she doesn't push.
And she's being herself.
She's being herself.
Which works in her favor.
And she's not being like the kind of journalist that I think I've heard her do things in the show. And Laura, you might feel the same way. Like when she went to visit April, and April said, April promises to send us a copy of that file. I'm like, no, Connie, take the file, go to Kinko's, make a copy of it yourself and bring it back to April. Like, but Connie's approach is just like, can you send me a copy of that? And the person's like, sure. And she's happy to walk away and just let them be. And I'm just like, wow, this is her secret weapon. This is her approach. It's also, I think, Toby, I think it's her narrative approach as well. And I think that we probably, I'm just guessing, would all agree there are times in this show where it unfolds very slowly and it's sort of like revealing layers slowly, and there's a lot of just like slow down moments. But Toby, what do you think of that style of storytelling? That some things are just let to kind of unfold at their own pace in that same kind of relaxed, slowed down way that I think Connie also kind of just is.
Right. And I think she's smart in that stuff doesn't happen until you're pretty into the story.
You mean the slow parts happen later in the podcast? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I was listening to, I don't know, like 5 and 6 or something today, and I was driving, and there's like a part of it where they're basically driving in the car and she's making a bunch of phone calls, and sometimes she's getting people and sometimes she's not, but it works. Because you're also kind of interested in what's going to happen when she reaches these people. So I think there's a way in which you kind of get put into her shoes. You have the same sort of feeling of expectation about what she's going to find out. And then when they go to Little Pine in Saskatchewan, things go pretty slowly there too, but you get a sense that that's a reflection of just how interactions there are. It's sort of unhurried.
Thinking about those scenes, and especially when she first gets to Saskatchewan and she's talking to the men and they're talking about like the pipe ritual and the whole teepee thing, I kind of feel when listening to those, like that's the story she really wants to tell. She really wants to show us this kind of lost culture and these the stories of these people who are there and who have all these memories. Like, to me, that's where Connie's like storytelling heart is. And she's wrapped it in this framing device of this mystery, which is important, and it's a driver for the story.
But it's an opportunity to tell the story of the 60s.
It's an opportunity to tell the 60s, and it's an opportunity to have us meet the people.
Yeah, where she's able to talk about the schools in the first season of Missing and Murdered. How
Alberta Williams,
yeah, how that kind of get brought in. I think it's the same thing. It's an opportunity, but it's not a cheap one, because it's actually very relevant to this story,
right? And
what ended up happening to Cleo, and how she was taken from Saskatchewan and wound up in New Jersey. Which is, it's almost like a punchline in there if you're from New Jersey or something like that. But that whole thing is all sort of relative to the system that brought her there. And like we know, we're in the spoiler part of the podcast. Okay, we find out halfway through this series that she died by her own hand at age 13. So the idea that maybe we're going to get the answer to the question, who killed Cleo, we know that's not exactly what we're going to get. But I think that we already know the answer. Who killed Cleo? The system.
Question, Kevin. Yeah. Why would there be an open police file on somebody who committed suicide?
Well, I think it probably doesn't have anything to do with her suicide.
There might be another crime?
Another crime that she's associated with. And look, they keep dangling this story about a hitchhiker who got raped. I don't know, but I'm guessing that's going to tie in.
What do you think, Laura?
I think there's going to be more to the story if she can ever get her hands on that police file, because that, That seems like a lot for a suicide. I mean, it was a child, so that definitely makes it more unusual. I feel like there's going to be something else about that investigation that made it go on as long as it did, from the way that nobody would talk about it.
Right.
I feel like there's something else, like another piece of that puzzle that is going to be revealed at the right time.
Yeah. Can we just talk about Johnny, please?
You mean Samson?
Yeah, I really want to talk about Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
We meet more than three, but we primarily talk to three of Cleo's siblings in this podcast. There's Christine, who brought the story to Connie. There's April, who lives in a mysterious New England city that Kevin and I were like doing our best to guess at which city it was.
Same
mysterious here. New England town. I am leaning toward northern Vermont myself, but
they have
I don't
apartments
know.
with buzzers.
They have apartments with buzzers. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, and then there's Johnny, who was adopted to Pennsylvania after being basically bribed by the Canadian government with hockey camp and a bicycle, which fucking bananas story, but who sees himself now as an adult as being relatively at peace with the pain of his past. He knew his mother the best of all of the kids. He had to take care of the kids himself when he was a little kid. And he's turned into this incredibly tragic, incredibly stoic, incredibly lovable, but sad adult man. Almost seems like a fictional character, Johnny does. Toby, what do you think of this character? I kind of think he's like the heart of the podcast myself.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with him, obviously. One of the things that really struck me was when his cousin back in Saskatchewan was talking about how he just wished that, it's confusing, but Johnny is called Sammy back home because his middle name is Samson. But he was saying that he wanted Johnny to come home. And Johnny says that he doesn't want to go back. But the reality is that he's fairly assimilated. You know, he talks about how he's got a decent enough life and he's got his friends, and you feel as though, well, he's a tragic and clearly unhappy figure, that he is where he wants to be, and he feels sort of at home where he is at that point. So it's like this weird thing where the ultimate goal of this awful program, it ends up kind of being, I wouldn't say successful, but its goal is achieved with him, in that he doesn't have any interest in going back to, you know, the reservation. He basically is living the life of an American in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. There's a whole lot going on with him.
Yeah, he seems really, to me, very broken. You know, Kevin, we hear those scenes where he's talking about being abused on the farm where he was adopted out.
And I can say this now because I told friends about it. It wasn't any kind of insertion or nothing. They played like, oh, you're the cow, we're the bull. It was a weird game. But it was like, at the time, you don't think nothing of it. But it was like, there's nothing inserted, but it was still strange. I thought about it. I'm like, I was sitting one day thinking about it. I'm like, I came to revelation. I think I was abused, but I wasn't really abused. Does that make sense?
No, Johnny, that was definitely abuse. Yeah. Like, as a listener, you want to like talk back to him. You know, and he has, you know, all these memories that he's just saying, I'm fine with this, I'm fine with that. And it's so painful, right?
Yeah, you know, and I thought one of the, there were just a couple of times where people let their emotions get the best of them. Like Christine, there were a couple of times when she was talking about her mother, and, you know, she started to cry when she was talking to the government official. And like, you really could feel her pain. And then when Connie told the cousin in Little Pine the news about what happened to Cleo, you could tell he was, you know, sniffling, and he was fighting back some tears. And she said something like, are you okay, or do you want to take a moment? And he just said, like, I'll deal with it later.
Right.
Which is just like, I'm just basically saying, what I do is I stuff it down, and then I wait till I get home, and then I deal with it then, you know, or maybe I don't. It's hard. It's hard. And, you know, that's one of the strengths of the podcast and the interviewing, is that, you know, you get people to really open up, and you can see their pain. You can hear their pain.
What you were saying, Kevin, reminded me of when Connie tells Johnny that she's found Cleo. Right. And I'm like waiting for this big reaction. And he doesn't really react.
He was arguing with her about the date, remember? Like, he just argued about the logistics.
Yeah. I think she even said to him, I was expecting more of a response. Thinking about it afterwards, I think, you know, somebody that grew up like he did had to learn not to respond. So I think that his response to finding out about Cleo actually is very telling, because it's really, a sign of what he went through in his life to that point.
I do think that some people who are used to a different kind of podcast, a different pace of podcast, may find a lot of the backstory and family stuff takes away from what they want, which is action in the story.
Right.
This story is different from anything we've listened to like it, because to me, I almost think of it like a novel. The action in the story doesn't matter without hearing about the impact. And I am not a fan of grief porn, as you know. I don't like over-focusing on victims in these cases, over-focusing on family pain. I know people get wrapped up in that sometimes, but it can take away from just sort of like, the what happened aspect of it. But the pain is what happened in the story. What's interesting to me is that I have relatives that were alive when I was little and who died and who I never met. I don't think about what could have been different if I had the opportunity to meet and know those people, because I didn't have my entire culture ripped away from me involuntarily.
Right.
So the reason that these siblings care so much about a sibling they barely remember is because the opportunity wasn't even there. That's what they're grieving, is the opportunity. We get into a lot of history and a lot of the stuff around what the Canadian government did and how they're coping with it. But episode 8, the episode title, Salesman of the Year.
Oh,
thoughts? Yeah. I have a feeling some outrage.
I had some outrage, Rebecca. I went out today at lunchtime. I've had cabin fever. So I'm trying to go to lunch and do a walk. So I was like walking. We have a route up and down the river here in town. And I was listening to that episode and I started like swearing. Thankfully, there was no one around me. I was like, what the are you kidding me? Like, salesperson of the month for getting children adopted. It enraged me. And I was surprised. Speaking of reactions, I felt like Connie and Marnie weren't as outraged about it as I thought they should be, as they were. I mean, they kind of were, but they weren't, or maybe they just were used to it at that point in the research. But it's just such a commentary on like the state of what was going on in like the Canadian like social work / adoption system at that time, that they were able to internally in that agency joke about, quote, selling children, the most children, especially these Native children, into homes. That's when the pace picked up for me again.
Right.
In this, I was kind of like, we kind of had a little bit of a lull. We're kind of following up. I mean, we did have the random encounter with the dad in the casino. And then the salesperson episode, yes.
Yeah, it pissed me off. And that commercial?
Yeah.
Crazy.
Oh my God.
Well, let's talk about like the pacing and the style and the potential flaws here. Because I mean, we've talked about what's happening in the podcast, which we all agree is super interesting and contextually important. The structure. We have, a climax really in the midpoint of the episodes we've heard so far.
Right.
And then a lot more after that. Kevin, what do you think of the structure of this so far?
Well, I think it's very classical plotting structure, where you have the climax sort of in the middle, and then you have the falling action afterwards, and that sort of like what happens because of the climax, the fallout. And a lot of times with a mystery, it's weighted so that the climax happens at the end, the very end. We get sort of the surprise. I kind of thought, okay, we hit that episode and you find out that she kills herself, and there's probably not a crime associated with that. There's nothing left to tell of the story, but there is.
Right.
It's structured as such that this is Connie's journey from start all the way through, the things that she discovers. So that's good. I do have some other concerns about the narrative style, which I think you're holding your finger
just
up, so you want me to put a pin in it.
Can I just ask you a question about the climax, a moment just before the climax?
Yeah.
Before we knew about the suicide,
yeah.
When I heard about the suicide, I felt really bad about one thing.
What's that?
How I was yelling. You were in the car, and I were in the car together listening to the episode right before, when she has the meeting with Jill.
Yeah.
And Jill just refuses to tell her what happened to Cleo. And I'm like, why do you have to be such a bitch, Jill? Just tell her. Yeah. What is the matter, Jill? Like, that build-up part was just, it was true. It's what happened. But it was also like so frustrating in like a really great way. Sort of pre-climax way.
I totally suspected that's what the answer was
going to be. Why did you say something to me when I was in the car?
Why didn't I say? Well, I didn't want to ruin it for you. But why else would when you say, oh well, she had pneumonia and died? Yeah, like what would be?
What did you think, Laura?
I thought that somebody in her foster family killed her.
I thought that maybe Jill just was unsure what the details were, and she didn't want to get it wrong. So, Toby, you thought that the suicide was what was going to happen too?
Yeah, I mean that seems like the one most likely thing that somebody would not want to be the one to impart to somebody else, you know?
Yeah. Toby,
it works really well narratively, though, because you think when you find her, you're also going to find out exactly what happened to her, and you're going to get those two things like right at once.
Right.
But instead, that gets dragged out because you get one, but you don't get the other. So now you're like waiting for the other thing. So not that like people intentionally held back to build the suspense, but that was sort of a natural outcome of the fact that they believe they found her, but they don't know what happened to her.
Right, right.
It would have been shitty fiction, but it was
real. It was good real life.
Yeah, for nonfiction, the fact that it's real added that bit of suspense or waiting or whatever.
Now, Kevin, we share, I think, a justified criticism of this podcast. Do you want to be the one to talk about that?
Part of it is Connie's narrative, and I know, get grief for like the Canadian storytelling way, and I don't think this has anything to do with it. But look, there's an over-reliance on the rhetorical question to move things along, and it ends up being a real crutch and a distraction.
Yeah.
Mrs. Madonia told me that Cleo had attempted to go back to Saskatchewan, but she didn't say how. Did she try to hitchhike? Was that news story we read about a teenager being assaulted at all related to Cleo? If not, what would lead such a young girl to take her own life? Was there any doubt that it was a suicide? If not, why did police do such a comprehensive investigation? What is in that thick police file? Why does her biological family believe Cleo was murdered?
Context is important, and you can give it, and you can do it in that way. But if you count up the number of question marks in her script, I mean, it's excessive. And I tell you, once you hear it, you can't unhear it. It is persistent. And if I were a figure skating judge, I would be knocking lots of points off of this, off of what's a really good program.
Right, right.
So I just wish that it could dial back a little bit of the.
I can't help but wonder, and the questions, yes.
Yeah, and the word heartbreaking gets used at least once an episode.
Well, more than once an episode.
Yeah, and I'm like, you don't have to tell me what's heartbreaking.
Right.
Either I know it. You don't have to point that out. That's one thing you don't have to point out.
Right. I do feel
it's all tell and no show.
When you hear her say that to an interviewee, when someone tells her a story and she says that's heartbreaking. Like
no,
that should
that's
stay.
Fine.
That should stay.
Yeah, that should stay.
When she says it's heartbreaking to think of ...
Yeah.
To me, that's like the whole point of this is that we shouldn't need that. This is well done enough that we don't need it. We don't need you to tell us. Because it is. It just is. And we don't need you to tell us. I can't help but think
I can't help but think about Cleo Samagonis and the story that her family heard about her death.
Yeah, we're already there because you've done a really good job putting this together.
Yeah, it's too much A1 sauce on a really good steak.
Toby, do you hear the same thing that Kevin and I hear when we listen to this?
I did notice it. I did notice it, and it didn't necessarily bug me, but it is like it's a noticeable tick.
There are other podcasters we've smacked down for this kind of thing.
Yes,
so I think to be consistent.
Here's the thing.
Yeah, no, that's. I mean, it's not that the podcast is perfect in every single way,
right?
And this doesn't disqualify it as a good podcast.
Yeah, this is a legitimate criticism.
Yeah, because and the other thing is, it's like so much else of it is so well constructed. I actually really like the exposition that Connie does. That's just like telling us what she did. I think my favorite exposition in the show is when, they do some stuff that is like something you're hearing more sort of like Nat sound exposition, where she'll say, all right, we're getting out of the car and we're going to talk to so-and-so.
So Jen and I are off to talk to Nora. I'm really excited to actually talk to somebody who knew Lillian as an adult, because I don't feel like we've talked to anyone who's actually been able to tell us what Lillian was like. But Nora she's in her 80s, so we'll have to see just how much she remembers.
And she does that, and then she doesn't repeat it by saying, we got out of the car, and then we can talk to so-and-so.
Right.
Like she just leaves what she said there to set the scene in as the exposition. I like that, and I like it when she tells somebody that what they just said is heartbreaking. I don't like it when she tells me that it's heartbreaking. But I do think that those things stick out because she does such a good job of demonstrating how much something hurts. Like she can just let it sit and leave that quiet.
The thing that bugged me the most, and this is super nitpicky, and I'm going to regret saying it, but when they're reading the reports and there's like the typing in the background.
Yep. Unnecessary.
Ding.
Yep.
Yeah.
I was just like, you don't need to do that thing.
Yeah,
It
no,
just-
I
it
didn't like
seems a
that
little
either. I didn't like it either. I think that they did it for the first time to demonstrate they were doing the, that there was an actor, which I think is fine to do it as an audio cue once, and then to like have it just be like a quick audio cue here and there. But then it was just underneath the whole track of typewriting was underneath the person talking. That's whoever mixed it. I would just say I wouldn't have made that choice, but it is nitpicky. I agree. All right. Is it time for us to review this podcast, you think? Missing and Murdered, Finding Cleo. Okay. Should our listeners check this podcast out? Should they listen to the 8 episodes that have dropped so far and get into this story from Connie Walker and the CBC? Laura Bricker, thumbs up or thumbs down? I'm going to start with you.
I say thumbs up. This is one of the more interesting podcasts we've listened to in some time. And unlike, not to throw shade at the other Canadian podcasts they keep advertising, but, the mystery is solved. It's not like some of these podcasts we listen to where they're trying to find something out and they don't find a satisfying bit of information. We find it out. And then not only that, but you're also, I was not aware of all this background that she gets into about the 60s scoop and the residential schools. I knew some of that from the last podcast. So it's an issue that I think needs to have some awareness brought to it. And this was a good vehicle to do that.
Toby, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down on Missing and Murdered Finding Cleo from the CBC?
I think of the podcasts we've listened to, this is probably the most emotionally resonant of them. And I think in a way, like you were talking about how you don't like grief porn. I really don't like grief porn, but this is not that.
No, I agree.
This is telling a story that's illustrative of a much, much bigger story. Sometimes I talk about like, what's the point? Why is this a podcast? And it's just so clear in this one what it is. A big thumbs up for me. I think it's really a top podcast among the ones we've listened to.
Yeah, I agree. I'm giving it a big thumbs up too. If we were doing letter grading, I would say this is very close to an A. There is just a whole lot of there in terms of what the story is about on its surface, which is the mystery of finding Cleo, and then below the surface, which actually to me is really what the show is about. I, as Toby mentioned, am not a fan of overly focusing on impact, overly focusing on victims, overly focusing on grief. In this show, it's exactly what we need. I have found myself getting very emotional while listening in a way that is good for me. As somebody who is learning something, somebody who's connecting with strangers who I'll never meet. This show, when it's at its best, does what only audio can do, which is take you to places and put you in front of people and put you in situations you would never otherwise be in, and you feel immersed in them. You feel like it's very intimate, and we have an extremely likable and compassionate and talented journalist and storyteller doing the work. And I like and respect Connie so much. Never met her in person, but this show makes me feel like I know her, and that is the hallmark of good storytelling. So big thumbs up for me. What about you, Kevin?
I'm also a thumbs up. I do have some issues with some of the writing that we've gone over. However, I do think this is a great investigative job that she's done. Again, we're in the spoiler-free section here, but I'm just going to say from the start, when she says we got a name, we don't really have a date of birth. We don't really know where she went or how she died. I'm kind of like, why are you exploring this? This is going nowhere. And so the story that they are able to tell from there on out, and the way they're able to weave it into sort of the historical narrative about this time in Canadian history, which I'll just say a lot of us don't know much about.
Yeah.
It's very enlightening, and it's a good way of sort of bringing the two things together because one enhances the other. So
someone really does know something.
So I'm a thumbs up. This is a really sharp sounding podcast.
Do you ever meet someone who seems kind of off? Whether it's a creepy neighbor or a random phone number that keeps calling you, Truthfinder has you covered. You can search for people by name, address, phone number, email, and more. Truthfinder can be especially helpful for running confidential background checks on anyone you're planning to meet from online dating apps. Go to truthfinder.com/podcasts for a special offer. That's truthfinder.com/podcasts to access your special offer today.
Ready to pop the question? The jewelers at BlueNile.com have got sparkle down to a science with beautiful lab-grown diamonds worthy of your most brilliant moments. Their lab-grown diamonds are independently graded and guaranteed identical to natural diamonds. And they're ready to ship to your door. Go to BlueNile.com and use promo code WELCOME to get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more. That's code WELCOME at BlueNile.com for $50 off. BlueNile.com.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
So, Kevin, what are we doing next week on a new episode of Crime Writers On?
We're going to be talking about the Netflix series Heist and the podcast Chameleon, High Rollers.
Ooh, is that the a new season of what we listened to before from Chameleon, Hollywood Con Queen?
Yeah, it's the next season of that series. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait. So I guess this wraps it up for us, right, Kevin?
Well, we're not going to talk any longer, so yeah.
All right, listeners, we'll see you next week.
Partners in Crime Media.
You can live out your MasterChef dreams when you find a professional on Angie to tackle your dream kitchen remodel. Connect with skilled professionals to get all your home projects done well. Visit Angie.com. You can do this when you Angie that.